So the world's a funny place. It turns out that just a couple days before I put out my first response to Feddy, he'd put out this video which addresses some of the points I made in that video. So let's take a look at how badly he's thumped my previous arguments. Boy, I bet I'll look like a real fool.
If God is the one who guides and misguides, why are we held accountable for our beliefs or actions?
See, those of you who saw the other video remember me reading all the Quran verses about this. Well, we're heading into Feddy's explanation of it, which I'm sure will be absolutely brilliant, but I'm gonna answer this poor guy first. He seems so full of questions. He has such a longing for answers. He's just so confused about the world. And I'm sure that's true regardless of the fact that he's a paid actor. Now, the reason, my young friend, is that you're a plaything for God. Basically, he wrote a character for his screenplay, and he directed the film, and you just happened to be the actor that he forced to play the role at gunpoint. And after he was done editing the movie, he watched it and decided, you know what? I really don't like that character. He's terribly written. I think I'm gonna destroy that actor's life. Yeah, that sounds fun.
One day, an Islamic preacher went to a church in the United States to give a talk about Islam.
Oh boy, Feddy. You're jumping into the story right off the bat this time? Not even gonna bother with an intro, hey? Look, I'm 99% sure that most of you watching me don't spend a lot of time listening to Islamic apologetics. So for those of you who don't know, this is one of the most common forms of them. I spend a lot of time just looking for the videos that I'm gonna respond to, and usually I want to find one where the speaker regularly makes a point. That gives me something concrete to reply to. Point, counterpoint, right? And when it comes to other kind of apologetics, it's pretty often that I find that. But with Islam, it's always these fucking stories. They take a simple little point that would take at most like 1 or 2 sentences to explain, which everyone would understand just fine, and they make up a bunch of characters and stretch a story out over several minutes, only to end up just outright saying the fucking point at the end anyway, making the entire story a waste of time. This guy went here, and he saw this, and he went over there, and he talked to that guy, and he saw that, and that guy said, go do this. So he did that, and this happened, and that happened, and so on, until I'm tapping out songs on my desk in boredom and frustration, just waiting for them to get to the inevitable childishly simplistic argument they could have just fucking said in the first place already. Ugh. And so now you get to enjoy one of these stories with me. But you're a special crowd of people, because you're all used to analyzing the lowest dregs of the apologetics world with me, so I'm sure you're gonna get through this just fine.
And he had his young son with him. At the back of the hall, he found some coloring books and crayons.
Oh, and what did he do with the coloring books and crayons, Feddy?
So he asked his son if he would rather sit with the grown-ups and listen to the talk or stay there and color. The young boy chose to spend his time coloring.
Oh shit! Wrong answer, kid. You should have been paying better attention. You're a character in a story-form Islamic apologetic right now, buddy boy. You never choose the fun option if you value your safety. It's not always gonna go wrong, but usually. And when it does, it really does.
At some point in the lecture, the man was explaining the concept of destiny and acts of God when he was stopped short by a nun who told him, "You have a lot of contradictions in your religion."
Yeah, sure she did, Feddy. You know, I'd bet dollars to dimes that both the guy and the nun are just constructs meant to illustrate whatever lame point you're avoiding getting to. I mean, it's not like I'm under any illusions about nuns. It's not like I think they're all nice people who don't shout random theological heckles at their invited speakers. But it sounds pretty convenient for your little story here, I gotta say, and that immediately gets me suspicious.
So he asked her what she meant. She said, "You say that God gave man the power of choice and that he doesn't influence his choices, yet you also say that God knows what has happened in the past, what is happening in the present, what will happen in the future." That is contradictory, because if God knows what will happen in the future, so he will inevitably influence a person's choices and decisions so that they conform to what God, already knows.
See what I mean? Everything up to this point could have just been wrapped up in a simple statement like, some people argue that because God is omniscient and so knows everything that'll ever happen, even before it happens, he'll influence people's decisions to make those decisions conform to what he already knows will happen. Simple, concise, to the point. But no, that's not good enough. How can people possibly understand unless we divide it into a goddamn 3-act play, right? You know, it probably seems really weird to you that I'm so annoyed about this apparently minor inconvenience, but try watching a few dozen hours of this sort of thing and you'll start sympathizing with me, trust me. But as to the meat of that statement, the nun might have made a stupid argument like that, but of course, she's not really relevant. She's probably not even real. What is relevant is that apparently she's supposed to act as a proxy for all the people who make arguments like that of our mild-mannered, curious friend from the start of this video.
If God is the one who guides and misguides, why are we held accountable for our beliefs or actions?
And, well, she failed. because her argument addresses an entirely separate point. The question at the start was about the fact that the Quran repeatedly and clearly states that God guides people to Islam or misguides them away from it, but then has the fucking nerve to punish them for the result. Of course, it's even worse than that, since it also clearly states repeatedly that God doesn't just guide people, but actually mind controls people and forces them to accept or reject Islam and then punishes them for it. This is totally contrary to the nun's assertion that Islam says that God gave humans the power of choice and doesn't influence their choices. The fact that God is in total and complete control of everyone's choices and doesn't allow them to make their own choices is one of the central messages of the Quran. In my previous Feddy video, I read a number of verses demonstrating this, so I'm not going to do it again here. Just go watch that video and then read the Quran if you still doubt it. But this alleged nun's argument isn't really about God's justification for holding people accountable for actions and beliefs that he forced upon them. No, it's about the nature of omniscience. She says that if God knows everything that will happen in the past, present, and future, he will inevitably influence a person's choices to make them conform to this knowledge. Which to me is a little bit silly, because the fact is that if a God created the universe with 100% knowledge of every single event that would ever happen within it, no matter how minute, then there's absolutely no need for that God to influence anything in that universe after the fact to make it conform to what he knows is going to happen. The universe as he created it will necessarily conform to his foreknowledge already, because otherwise he's not all-knowing. Every action anyone will ever take was decided in advance by the God who created them, knowing exactly what they were going to do, and so the universe is at best like God looking at an entire film reel all at once. He knows what's on that reel, and the events depicted there aren't going to change, nor do the characters actually make decisions. They're not really free entities. When you watch The Lord of the Rings, do you actually think Isildur can decide to destroy the ring? Of course you don't. You're not stupid. The movie's already been made. Isildur has no decision to make. The possibility of choice wasn't just gone long before you ever put the disc in the player. The possibility never existed in the first place. But maybe she just meant God influences them before the actual creation of the universe. I don't know. Of course, the Christians have the same problem in their own theology, so I think that nun should stop talking before someone shoves that shit back in her face.
So the man pointed at the child in the back and said, "This is my son. When we came in, I asked him to choose freely between coloring and listening to the lecture, and I did not influence his decision in any way."
How does he know? I'm just asking because this dad seems a little unfamiliar with how subtly a person can influence someone else, which basically means he's ignorant of human psychology, and in particular the reason why blinding is necessary in scientific experiments, which also probably explains a lot about why he's a Muslim.
I was 99% sure before he opened his mouth that he would choose to spend his time coloring. That is because I am his father, and I have knowledge of my son's disposition, and I am acquainted with the nature of that age.
Great, so his analogy fails. I guess we don't need to talk about it then. But okay, I'll expand on that. This dad was 99% sure his son was going to choose to color. Okay, which means that even by his own judgment of his accuracy level, there's a 1% chance he's wrong, which means he's not omniscient, which means he cannot function as analogous to God when the problem with God that we're discussing relates specifically to omniscience. Not good predictive power, not a good ability to guess, all-knowingness only. That's the only time that this issue comes up. 99% means this dad does not know the past, present, and future in their totality with absolute certainty. All he has is past experience with his son and with other kids of a similar age, which he can apply using induction to make an educated guess about what might happen in specific circumstances. He might be right an impressive amount of the time, but not all the time, unless luck is really in his favor. And the only way he'll ever know that his guess was right is when it's confirmed after the fact. That's not the case with God, and the fact that it's not the case with God is the very thing at issue here. It's the entire foundation of the argument, so any discussion of the accuracy of this random dad's guesswork is totally irrelevant to the topic at hand. It's nothing more than a plainly obvious case of question dodging. If he's trying to use that as the basis for a justification of the compatibility of free will with an omniscient creator God, it's invalid right from the start. We don't even need to consider it. No, pathetic distractions aside, what we're talking about here is a being with absolute perfect foreknowledge with no chance that anything that boy ever does will ever vary even slightly from that predefined script by the one who created the entire universe and the exact configuration of stuff within it at every possible point along the timeline. That's another thing too, is the dad did not create his son in that sense. According to you, this God thing did. And in that case, the only reason those choices exist, of listening to the lecture or coloring in a coloring book, is that, well, they don't. There is no choice. That coloring in the coloring book was created billions of years before the boy's birth by that being. The boy is just a configuration of what that being created, performing the actions that being decided it wanted that boy to perform. He's nothing more than a meat robot with no meaning in its life other than to mechanically follow the program of its creator and no means of escape. And yeah, I believe that there is no God and that the universe is still like that, because regardless of whether you're totally controlled by the design of God or by the laws of physics, it amounts to the same thing. But the difference between people like me and people like Feddy is I own it. Yeah, that's how things are, and no, I don't fucking care. But when you point out this severe case of cognitive dissonance to a believer who somehow believes both in an omniscient creator and free will, they get really upset sometimes. It's a lot of fun, try it sometime. It's a good demonstration of why an emotional commitment to beliefs with internal contradictions is never a good idea, folks.
So why do you find it hard to fathom that God, who is the all-knowing and who is acquainted with all things, can know with 100% certainty of all your choices without influencing them?
Because he also created them? Look, I agree, if God wasn't the creator, you'd have a point. Not because of anything you actually said up until this point, because that was all completely irrelevant to the point, and I have no idea how you even thought it was relevant, but just in the fact that being all-knowing does not mean you influence the stuff you know about. If the universe just happened to exist entirely uncreated, and God just happened to exist and know everything about the universe with 100% certainty, then that wouldn't imply that he had any influence over the universe. Of course, it would still mean you're a puppet going through a predefined script. God didn't create the universe, but he can see its entire structure, including how events occur in time, frozen before him like some kind of big crystal structure, unchanging forever. There's still no choice because everything that to us seems not to have happened yet has in fact been preset and locked in place. But if he played no part in creating it and never interacted with it, but just passively understood it, then it's true, he'd have no influence over it. But that's not the God you propose, so that's not the God we're talking about, so the argument is worthless.
We must know that man is a very special creature. God Almighty gave him the ability to choose between good and evil.
Oh, so story's over then. I guess. I mean, it seems like it's just you talking now. Yeah, that's another feature of these stories. They often just kinda end with no real resolution. Like, I'm curious now, man. You got me invested in the story and now you just pull it away. No, that's it. That's all you get. What did the nuns say? Did everyone applaud? Was it one of those moments? The public wants to know, Feddy, but I guess the dude and the kid and the nun fulfilled their purpose of padding out your one-sentence counter-argument into a 2-minute fairy tale. Now you can just unceremoniously dump their asses and move on to making a bunch of invalid points based on that one piss-poor analogy. Awesome! Oh, and no, God didn't give anyone the ability to choose shit. Not only does the definition of God make it impossible, but the Quran outright says it. You know what? Here are a couple verses I used in the last video. I'm not going to read them. Read them yourself. Enjoy.
And it is man alone who bears the consequences for his choices.
Right, and because there are no actual free choices to be accountable for, as shown both by the implications of the characteristics that you yourself ascribe to God and by the constant and clear assertion of your holy book, and because any consequences serve absolutely no correctional purpose whatsoever, since the person's still just going to do whatever the fuck God wants them to, people find that objectionable, you dumb shit. If you have trouble understanding what your opponents are talking about when they bring this kind of thing up, maybe you should actually take just a few minutes of your time to try to understand what it is that has your opponents so annoyed about this being you worship, and the fact that you straight-facedly call it good. If you're gonna argue against someone, it's the least you can do. But you're not going to, of course, because why waste time listening to the worthless unbelievers who are just gonna be dumped in a fucking fire pit anyway? You wouldn't want to give God an excuse to melt your eyes out of your head for the decisions he made you make. So it'd be better to spend your time getting some of those reward tokens by muttering another few incantations over yet another pepperoni-less pizza.
At the same time, God is all knowledgeable about everything.
Yes, we've already been over that, and that's why any analogy of how well a person can guess the outcome of events based on past experience is irrelevant to objections about God's omniscience. Because someone having lots of experience and being good at guesswork doesn't mean they know the future. It means they know the past, which is a totally different and completely irrelevant subject. If you drive past 10,000 red houses and somebody asks you what color the next house is going to be, you might as well just say red, sure. People here really seem to like the red houses. I think you'd be kind of an idiot if for no reason at all you said blue. But that doesn't mean you know it's going to be red. It can just as well be blue. So that's not godlike.
There is such a thing as influential knowledge as well as non-influential knowledge.
No, I'm pretty sure you just made that up. Knowledge in no way implies influence. As I said, no matter how much God knew about the universe, if he didn't create it and he didn't interact with it, he's not influencing it. But again, you're talking about something that's not being discussed here. We're not talking about some God that someone might hypothetically believe in who comprehends but never interacts. We're talking about your God, who created the entire universe precisely according to his own will, with absolute knowledge of every aspect of that universe at every point in time, and complete intention for it to be that way. Or in other words, it's a God who constructed an object of time and space in a particular shape, and froze it into an elaborate, unchanging structure, like I said, within which can exist no change and no choice, because every apparent change and every seeming choice was defined before anything even existed to change, and before anyone existed to choose.
A skilled teacher who is well acquainted with his students and who knows their academic level, their capabilities, and their way of thinking can tell with 95% certainty who of them will pass an exam and who will fail, and can tell with 90% certainty who of them will get an A and who will barely pass.
Oh good, another absolute failure of an analogy about high confidence that entirely fails to address the subject of an all-knowing creator. Why are you running away from the real argument here, Feddy? Why do you so desperately want to avoid what's actually being said? Why do you refuse to discuss the conflict between free will and omniscience, and between the lack of free will and the hellfire and a merciful God? Why do you keep trying to distract me with analogies that have nothing whatsoever to do with this discussion? Well, I guess it's obvious why, isn't it? Continue.
All of this happens without him influencing the outcome. His knowledge does not influence the results of the exam.
Right, which is why it's a terrible analogy. Hey, but it's okay, Feddy, don't be sad, I'll fix it for you. Here's a more accurate analogy. Let's say there's a teacher who knows with 100% certainty who will pass an exam and who will fail, and he knows with 100% certainty who will get an A and who will barely pass, because, I don't know, he's from the 5th dimension or something. He can see his students throughout all time and space, so he can tell everything they'll ever do. And, I don't know, let's say he actually created all of his students, and as he was fine-tuning them before activating any of them, he looked at everything they would do along the entire timeline and he went, no, that guy passes the exam, I don't really want him to. Let's just tweak this and change that, until everyone who he wanted to pass the exam passed it, and everyone he didn't want to pass didn't pass. And then he activated his little automatons and let them run their course, and sure enough, the ones he created knowing they would pass the exam passed it, and the others didn't. What a fucking shock. Incredible, right? Oh, but of course he didn't influence the results of the exam. No! Because, You know what? This argument isn't strong enough yet. I think it's missing one critical piece. Let's say that a few centuries earlier along the timeline, that 5th dimensional teacher wrote a book explaining that, yes, he actually does have absolute influence over everything his students do or think, especially regarding whether they'll pass or fail the exam. And later on, some gross, weird prick on YouTube declared this book to be the perfect, infallible word of the great 5th dimensional being, but also, for some reason, insisted that it doesn't actually say what it actually says, or something, which is kind of weird. But that's starting to sound an awful lot like God and your relationship to him. Maybe there wasn't really any need for an analogy there at all. We kind of could have just talked about God and stayed on point instead of fucking around dismantling inaccurate analogies. So okay, let's talk about God. Denying God's word is blasphemy, Fed. Do you believe what the Quran says or not? If you don't, God might decide you deserve to go to hell for not believing what he made you not believe. And you'll look like a little bit of a hypocrite if you disagree.
Each student is responsible for his or her own grade, and nobody should be held accountable for it except the student himself or herself.
If your analogy were relevant, sure, maybe, but it's not, so let's move on.
This is despite the fact that the teacher knows in advance what the grade will be.
Dude, he doesn't know that at all. You said he has about 95% confidence, which means that even if we take the amount of confidence he feels to be the actual probability of him being right, then he has a 5% chance of being dead wrong. If there are 20 students in his class, that's a pretty goddamn high chance that at least one of them is going to surprise him. Wait, why are we still talking about this analogy?
Because his knowledge does not affect the student's performance on the exam.
Right, you've already said that, and so have I, and I've said it in relation to God too. But see, I'm a little bit confused because I thought this video was going to address the question raised at the start of the video.
If God is the one who guides and misguides, why are we held accountable for our beliefs or actions?
And yet here you are, off in the weeds, talking about something that has nothing to do with anything. Hey, I'll tell you what. I need to switch it up a little bit here because you just keep saying the same thing and that's making me start repeating myself. So let's take this in a slightly different direction based off the wording of that question. Forget omniscience, forget creation, forget all that. Let's go back to your teacher analogy, just a simple teacher. And let's say the teacher was really involved with his students and preferred to take the time to teach them individually. Let's say these students are special needs first graders, and he feels a really great responsibility to provide individual guidance and make sure they understand the world accurately. Great teacher, right? So he goes up to one student and he says, "Okay, little Billy, we're gonna learn about the Earth today. The Earth is shaped like a ball and it orbits the sun." And the kid says, "Wow, Mr. Teacher, that's neat." And then he goes up to another student and says, "Okay, little Timmy, we're gonna learn about the Earth today. The Earth is a flat disc that sits on 4 elephants on the back of a turtle." And the kid says, "Really? That is so cool. Thank you for teaching me." And Mr. Teacher, with a big friendly smile on his face, goes through all the other students in the class, teaching them, based on his whim, that the Earth is a sphere or that the Earth is a disc. And the next day, Mr. Teacher hands out the test. And because of all the attention he spent tutoring those students one-on-one, every student remembers what he said about the shape of the Earth. Wow, how impressive. And they all write down the answer they were told. Such good students. Yeah, they're special, but they're just as capable if they have the attention they need. And then Mr. Teacher marks the exams, and he proceeds to curb stomp every little piece of shit kid who wrote down that the Earth is a sphere, because that's the wrong fucking answer, you little prick. Now, who is accountable here, Feddy? Well, according to you, it's the students. And I think that's a little bit disturbing.
And the best example of similar knowledge belongs to God.
Similar to what? Oh, right, to the knowledge of the experienced teacher. Wouldn't the best example of similar knowledge to an experienced teacher be the knowledge of another experienced teacher?
God Almighty knows how we will choose between good and evil without forcing us to choose one or the other of them.
Okay, so God's not the creator, gotcha. That is what you mean, right? I mean, that's the direct implication here based on everything previously established, because, after all, God's knowledge or lack thereof is not the thing that's forcing us to do a certain thing. It's the creation part that does that. Regardless of how well he understands his creation, we're still trapped inside it, following an inescapable set of rails from the start of our journey to the end. The things we do are still not a result of free will in the religious sense, regardless of whether he made it work that way out of evil or incompetence. And even if God is a complete imbecile who doesn't understand how his creation works at all, he's still the one responsible for creating it that way. He's the one who made the thing that's forcing us to do stuff. I don't really see the difference between him forcing us and his creation forcing us. Either way, whether he understands what he's created or not, there's no way for him to justify getting pissy about the structure of his creation and torturing people for it. Incompetence does not give you a free pass to turn evil without anyone calling you out on it. But of course, again, none of this is relevant because according to you, God is not incompetent. In fact, he's a hyper-intelligent supervillain. He created the universe fully intending for it to be exactly as it is, so if anyone ends up going to hell, it's because he wanted them to, which means that he basically just created them to dump them into hell. This is exactly what he wanted.
His knowledge of our choices is not the reason that we choose one particular path.
I know. His creation of the universe this way is why we choose one particular path. The fact that he knew full well we'd only have the option to choose the path that he created us to choose, and yet still tortures us for following that path, is what makes him evil. You seriously need to start paying attention, man, so in the next video maybe you'll come up with some counter-arguments to a point someone's actually making. Oh, and by the way, for the sake of the newbies here, when I'm arguing about this stuff, I treat God like he's real, just for the sake of argument, just in case you're wondering why I keep talking about how God is or isn't.
The difference between the knowledge of God and the knowledge of the teacher is that the teacher can only expect a certain outcome, and however accurate his expectations are, he will never be 100% accurate. There will always be a margin of error in his expectations, if only a 1% error.
Oh, so you do know your analogies don't work. Hey, so since the entire point of your analogy hinged entirely on the identicalness of the teacher's predictive power to God's omniscience, and since you knew all along that those things aren't identical, why did you even bother?
As for the knowledge of God, it is not based on expectations, because God is the first and the last. He is not bound by time and space. He knows absolutely everything.
This is weird, man. It's like you're catching up now to where I was 15 minutes ago. But I somehow doubt you're going to follow me all the way to my conclusions, are you?
In the Quran, God Almighty uses the past tense when he talks about things that to us will happen in the future.
Yeah, I get it. God's outside space and time, God sees it all at once and all that. I've been bringing that up this whole video. Where have you been? Anyway, I'm skipping the part where you try to prove this from the Quran because, yeah, we get it already.
Is it God who leads us down the righteous path or decides to lead us astray?
Yes. Citation, entire Quran.
And how can he punish someone whom he has led astray?
Oh, you know, because he's a pathetic weirdo. I mean, there's really no other option here. You can't make a robot that stacks blocks and then punish it for stacking blocks unless you got a few screws loose.
Well, it is in fact God who decides to lead someone to righteousness or to lead him astray.
Did I just hear that right? Say it again.
It is in fact God who decides to lead someone to righteousness or to lead him astray.
Wow, you gotta be kidding me. Okay, look, in the last video I assumed you'd have some sort of way to avoid acknowledging that fact because if an omniscient being chooses to make someone believe or disbelieve something and then punishes them for what it inflicted on them, especially in the unimaginably severe and infinite manner God supposedly does, then there's no defending that being. And yet here you are nonchalantly agreeing that God does this and apparently you have no problem with that at all. I knew you were a sick motherfucker, but you're on a whole other level, man. A level of either such vicious misanthropy or such severe delusion that I'm concerned you might be a danger to yourself and others.
God says, referring to the verses of the Quran, through it he makes many go astray and leads many to the right path. But it is only the rebels he makes go astray.
Ah, I see. So, to build on the example of the special needs kids, it's basically, if any of you little shits rebel against my authority and talk back to me even once, I'm gonna teach you nothing but the wrong answers and then beat you fucking bloody when you don't pass my tests. That's a perfect analogy to what you just said. Am I the only person who sees senseless cruelty based on pointless, convoluted rules as actually kind of more cruel than senseless cruelty based on simple rules? It takes on less of a character of a brute enforcing his authority through violence, and more the character of a serial killer psychologically torturing his victim before they die. I don't know, I kind of think it's worse, but either way it's a lot worse when the victims are vastly inferior mentally or physically, as is definitely the case in my example, and which supposedly, according to Islam, we are in relation to God. But somehow it gets even worse, since the only reason they're rebels in the first place is that he made them that way. That's the whole creation with full foreknowledge thing. Hey, Feddy, did you know that murder is considered a worse crime when it's done with full malice of forethought? Do you know why that is? Of course you don't, silly me for even asking.
He also says, why are you divided regarding the hypocrites, when God himself has rejected them because of what they have done? Do you want to guide those God has left to stray? If God leaves anyone to stray, you, Prophet, will never find the way for him.
Yeah, kinda makes you a bit sick to your stomach that a person could write that and feel good about it, eh? I'm gonna use my ultimate power to make people match my arbitrary mold of a bad person, and then I'm gonna drag them to hell for matching my arbitrary mold of a bad person so they can entertain me with their screams. And nobody's ever gonna be able to help them. Hey humans, you can't help shit. Ha 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 ha! Oh, how lovely. Let me present my ass to this being in case it requires further satisfaction.
But the point here is that we must understand that God Almighty doesn't just decide to lead people astray at random or for personal reasons.
Yeah, he does. He created every detail of every single human being and every event that'll ever transpire. That means he made some people whatever the fuck he wants to call rebels and some people not that. And how did he make that decision? Well, certainly not based on anything under the person's control, since absolutely everything about them was decided by him, not by them. Might as well just have said all black people go to heaven and white people go to hell or some shit. But actually that's not even true either, because again, he decided all of this before he even created them in the first place. So any feature he didn't like about them could have just been changed. He basically picks up a featureless blank of a person, says this one's going to hell, and then builds it as a thing that'll go to hell, and then paints a face on it and paints characteristics on it. He decides entirely randomly, you know, here's some people, I'll make them obey my will, here's some other people, I'll make them rebel against my will, I'll paint that chess pawn white, I'll paint that one black. Doesn't matter one bit. Just pick one out of the bin and paint it, man. They're all the same plain blank to start with, except in humans' case, the blank is non-existence.
In other words, God will never decide to lead astray all people whose names start with a certain letter, for example. There is no such thing. Or the inhabitants of a certain region, for example. There is no such thing.
Yeah, I know, that's not nearly random enough. That actually requires them to have features by which he distinguishes which ones will rebel and go astray and which ones won't. How is he supposed to truly blind himself to what kind of people he's sentencing to his torture dungeon unless he decides they're gonna rebel first and then assigns them other features afterwards? He couldn't do that, don't be silly.
God leads astray a certain category of people. and it is up to a person to make himself among that category or not.
Okay, I've already talked about the lack of free choice so much I feel like I'd be beating a dead horse if I went into it again. So I'll just say, how is the category of people God forced to rebel any less random or personal than the category of people God forced to have names starting with a certain letter, or people God forced to be from a certain region? It's all equally trivial to a god, and it's all equally based on his own will. God just picked some random, pointless feature and decided that was the ticket to Torture Town.
So we find that the Quran says, and God does not guide the evildoers, the unjust. You can decide whether to become among the evildoers or the unjust or not. Again, the Quran says, and God does not guide those who break his laws, the transgressors. You can decide whether to be one of them or not. He also says in the Quran, God does not guide the mischief of the treacherous. You can decide whether to be among the treacherous or not. And so it goes on. God does not guide those who misguide others. God does not guide any ungrateful liar. God does not guide any rebellious, outrageous liar.
Alright, we're just going around in circles here. You're not really getting to the point, and I suspect that that's because you don't really understand what it means for a being to be the omniscient creator of the entire universe, which is really weird if you believe there's a being that is. You probably should actually understand what the hell you're talking about. Now, I've already explained it, and I'm not going to explain it another 100 times just because you don't understand the very concept of your own God. So let's change the subject, eh?
God's guidance can be compared to signposts along the highway. Some people see them, and others do not, perhaps because they are talking on the phone or eating while they are driving, and so on.
Yeah, or because a mean old wizard conjured a blindfold over their eyes. Damn it, no, I said we're changing the subject.
Those who do not see the signs are similar to those who have never been sent a prophet, or who never received correct knowledge about religion.
Okay, so how can I verify if I've been sent a prophet or received correct knowledge about religion? Because everything I've ever heard you say was an irrational mess, so I highly doubt that you're giving me anything correct about religion. Hell, in the last video you didn't even give me correct knowledge about the Quran verses you cited, since you fucked up the numbers. Forgive me if I'm inclined to take your word with a little pinch of salt.
As for those who do see the signposts, there are those among them who follow the directions and therefore reach the correct destination.
Are there? Let's be clear about the analogy here. The signpost you're concerned with here seems to be Muhammad's highly convenient, self-contradictory, pig-ignorant waste of paper. I get that much, but what's the correct destination? Is it Islam? Is it heaven? Because if Islam is the destination you deem correct, you could still be wrong, and you could be damning all those people to hell by convincing them to read that signpost and follow it. You have no good reason to think that destination is correct, which is why your justifications for asserting it are just as lame and brittle as everyone else's. But I'm going to assume that the correct destination is heaven, or at least avoiding getting tortured. What makes you think those signposts actually lead to heaven? Or that there actually is a heaven? To me, it sounds like you found a signpost that claims to lead to the magical land of Oz! And that alone was enough to convince you, a grown-ass man, that if you follow that road, it'll actually take you to see the Wizard of Oz!
And there are those who see the signposts but insist on not following the directions. They may say, No, I know of a better way to reach the destination.
Oh, I agree. Not a lot of people know the directions to heaven. In fact, I don't think anybody does because I don't think there is one. But then again, not a lot of people know the directions to Oz either, which is probably why if they see a signpost that says, "This way to the magical land of Oz," and they think about whether they want to take the exit and try driving all the way to Oz, they might just say, you know what? That's almost certainly bullshit. There's no evidence for Oz other than the mere existence of this signpost. And that movie. No, I only have a little bit of gas in my tank. I'm not going to waste it chasing fairy tales. I'm going to spend it driving to that very real city I see over there instead to see my fucking family. If someone else wants to waste their time driving to Oz, they can, but I think they're fools if they bother.
Or, who wrote that signpost anyway? Or, I think there is some mistake in these directions.
Well, yeah, let's say you want to drive to, pick a city, Toronto, starting from Saskatoon. And you see a sign along the highway that says, Toronto, this way. And you follow it and it leads you onto some single-lane gravel back road that after like 4 miles ends at a lake. And so you're a little weirded out and you turn around and you go back to where you saw the sign. And you keep driving further down that highway until you see another sign that says, Toronto, this way. And it points in exactly the opposite direction from the first sign. So you follow that one and it leads you to some tiny little village. And you ask people where Toronto is and they're like, dude, you're still in Saskatchewan. There shouldn't even be any signs pointing to Toronto here. So you're like, what the fuck? Who wrote those useless lying signs? But okay, so you turn around, you go back to the highway and you keep driving. Out of Saskatchewan, through Manitoba, into Ontario. And then you see another sign that points the way to Toronto with the words, Toronto, this way, gas the Jews. Well, half that sign seems reasonable, but tell me you're not going to start wondering what prankster might have written that sign and be just slightly skeptical of his directions, Feddy. I mean, this should be obvious, right? You're basically promoting the idea that people should never question any sign they ever see along the road, ever. No matter how absurd it is, no matter how many other signs directly contradict it. Oh, well, unless it's the wrong shade of green, or if it's not exactly the right shape and the right size, or if its border is too thin or too thick. Really, you should only be following signs that are 5 feet wide by 3 feet tall with a 0.97-inch border and which have a green background of precisely the hex value 13D413. Now granted, those are some of the most idiotic signs out there, saying things like, please pet the bears, and run into the barricade at 88 miles an hour. But you just need to trust them, because if you don't believe that every single one of those signs was put up by the government and has perfect directions, you're gonna get lost. And the punishment for getting lost is the government locks you up and pulls out your fingernails, because the government thinks you didn't appreciate their very clear and graciously provided guidance. So what you waiting for? Follow the road signs to Oz and gas the Jews.
So God provides the guidance, but it is up to man to accept that guidance.
Alright, well, if his guidance is anything like those road signs, which it is, then he should have done a hell of a lot better making his guidance not suck. I mean, he's supposed to be able to do better, right? I mean, unless you really do think he's totally incompetent. But look, this is getting pretty long here, and you provide no shortage of fantastic response material. There are so many good videos on your channel, and there are like 2 minutes left of your video here, and we've only gone through about 8. And basically all you do for those 2 minutes is ramble about shit we already covered. So if someone has a problem with me skipping all that, well, you can respond to the rest yourself, go for it. But I'm gonna jump straight to the end.
God gave us guidance, but some of us just don't want to be guided. So instead of losing time contemplating who guides us, look at the directions on the signposts and follow them.
All of the signposts? Feddy, let's say that instead of going by minor variations in the appearance of the signs, there are different sets of signposts that are marked with the logos of different organizations, right? And all these signposts have contradictory information printed on them, and their directions are all different. Now you're telling us that we need to look at these signposts and follow all of them without losing time contemplating which of these various organizations are going to guide us accurately. Well, I see an awful fucking lot of signposts telling me an awful lot of different things. I don't have enough gas in my car or even enough time in my life to follow all of them, now do I? I'd cover millions of miles being misled over and over and over and over. So I think that instead of taking your ludicrous advice and not putting a moment's consideration into which of these organizations might actually provide trustworthy information and directions, if any of them will, I'm going to come up with some kind of strategy to figure out to the best of my ability whether the information on the signpost is accurate. So I look at one of them and it says, the moon is a square circle. Turn left here to go to Oz. No. I look at another one. This sign is impossible to read. Take exit 61 to Oz. No thanks. Another one. The government will torture you for not towing the party line because it's so merciful. Flap your arms really, really hard to reach Oz. Absolutely not. Fuck you. And so on, and so on. Seems like a pretty reasonable way to eliminate possibilities to me. Sure, maybe I'll lose a little bit of time doing it, but I save an absolutely massive amount of time by not taking those signs' directions. I honestly can't believe that you would flippantly dismiss the concept of figuring out if something is true as being a waste of time, while simultaneously believing that it's not a complete waste of time to assume that literally everything anyone ever says God told them is totally accurate, even if it doesn't match up with what other people have said, although of course obviously excluding anyone who came after the one who's arbitrarily designated as the last one. I mean, it's not like the contradiction would matter, there's plenty of those already, but that's one contradiction you just won't allow. And then dedicate every moment of your life to following their instructions. Something is seriously broken in your head, Fed.
And God willing, you will be among those guided to the righteous path.
Chance willing, more than God. You're basically just doing every single thing every sign says, hoping that somehow one of them's magically gonna lead you to where you actually want to go. And you feel like you can't ever stop employing this strategy because if you do, they're gonna get you. I gotta say, man, your odds are really slim if that's your strategy. And it just seems like you're making your trip fucking miserable for no good reason. You're never gonna end up reaching Oz, you're just gonna end up stranded out in the middle of nowhere with no gas. But hey, I guess all of us do eventually. Although some of us who have more realistic destinations might actually reach a few of them beforehand, and there's a whole lot less panic and confusion involved. Seems a little more productive. But you do you, man. Anyway, I guess that's it, but I'm sure we'll meet again. Even though I find you to be a repulsive person in every possible way, I've actually kind of come to enjoy talking to you. It's weird. So I'll see you soon, Feddy. Thanks for watching. If you like my channel, consider supporting me on Patreon. These wonderful people have, and they get every video a day early, among other perks. Or if you want to support me just one time, I also have a PayPal, links in the description. If you want to see more videos, subscribe and thumb up this video, and I'll see you in the next one.